Hello and welcome to episode 6 now of the 1100 project with me, Stuart White. The 1100 project is my self publishing mission to produce a traditional publishing standard worthy book and to sell 1000 copies and get 100 reviews within 12 months. So we've talked a little bit in the previous episodes about some of the starting points, the reasons for self-publishing, and some of the basic tips. I gave you 10. In fact, it was more than that, wasn't it? It was about 12 different tips in the last video to help you get started if you were looking at self-publishing. And it talked a little bit about the points at which you get started, the things that you need to do in advance. So I'm assuming that by this stage, either you're interested in hearing about the project or you're interested yourself in self publishing. So that's why you're continuing to listen. So I'm going to talk a little bit about timelines and I'm going to talk a little bit about budgets today. Okay, they're going to be the two main focuses for this particular episode. Now, they're both quite big things, so I'm hoping that I can fit them in a timely way within the duration of the episode. But if not, then we'll obviously just do a part two or whatever that goes along with it. And I should say that I've tailored the information for this episode of the podcast to people who are maybe starting out and so haven't uh, made budgets, haven't made timelines, and so on. You might have already published a book yourself and be looking at this and thinking, oh, that's not how I did it, or that's not how I would do it if I was to do it again. But this is just to give people a starting point. And similarly, not everything that I'm saying is exactly how I've done it as well, although I will point out where there are points of difference throughout the explanation of the process. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about timelines and budgets today, and I'm quite excited about talking about both of those things because they are things which, if you go via the traditional publishing avenue, they they are things that are often out with your control. So you can't control the budget, you can't control the timeline. You sign a contract and you're then having to hand in edits, having to hand in final copies, having to do X, Y, Z by certain dates throughout the process, and it can be quite a long time as well. I was chatting to Maz in the last episode about how she had to wait for 2 years for her first book after the point of signing, and she's obviously now in the mill, so it's not so much of a mind consumer having to wait for those next books, but it is a longer process than it probably is on average, and I'm sure some of you will agree with me on this than it would be for self-publishing. I know that some people they just say, "Well, the book's ready, the cover's ready, let's just get the book out," and whereas other people might be thinking about self-publishing but not actually have finished the book yet, or even this is a point where I'm not sure you should be doing it. But if you haven't started the book and you're thinking about self-publishing and thinking about timelines, then obviously you're going to have to put in a lot of buffer there for all the various setbacks that there's likely to be. We all know from attempting to write a book or having completed writing a book just how many things can get in the way when you're trying to do so, life things but also writing things and plot things and it's yeah, it can take a while. So if you are not you haven't written a book yet, then you're going to have to put a much bigger timeline on it than someone obviously who has a completed book that's been edited and is ready to go. And we'll talk about the variance and the spectrum of timelines that you could potentially use when you're self-publishing your book. But the important thing is it's not so much the amount of time that you set aside for things, it's just ensuring you have the time to do each stage that's important. And obviously, if you are skipping stages or not doing some stages or have already done some stages, then that is obviously going to have an impact on the particular timeline that you go with. Just before I get delved into the depths of timelines, which is making me strangely excited, I wanted to say thank you to everyone who's still listening at this stage. To get the duration of or the lifespan of a podcast usually you see lots of people listening to the first couple of episodes and then it just starts to go down and down and down, and Yeah, so if you're still going at this stage, that means that you're a true fan, you're a true diehard, and you enjoy listening to what we're talking about in the podcast. And I wanted to say thank you to all of you for that. And as usual, if you want to drop me a wee message or share the podcast online, I really do appreciate that. It's something that is going to be a big part of my life over the next 12 months, and it's nice to be able to share it with all of you who are still working who are still watching, pardon me, at this stage. Okay, so let's get into timelines then. So what I'll do is I'll go through I'll just list all the different things that you need to consider in the timeline, and then we'll go through each of them and sort of think about realistic times, and then we'll move on to the budget side of things, which is always a contentious topic, I think, amongst self publishers, and something that you do need to carefully consider before you go down that path. So, timelines. I have written down some of the stages that you should be considering, but they might be different from the ones that you need to consider. And so feel free to remove anything that's not applicable. So I've written writing your book. Now, as I said at the start, I really think you should have written your book before you start thinking about self publishing. But let's say you haven't. I think on average, I write a book in about maybe 6 months in total. Sometimes it takes longer than that because I take breaks and I don't write for a little while. But yeah, about 6 months to write the book from start to finish. So at least give yourself that. But if this is your first book or you've not done it before, you'll not necessarily know how long it will take. So you might want to give yourself even more time and maybe not put any firm plans in place until you have at least that finished draft of the book. Although I think personally you should be further along than that before you're doing it. But anyway, that's something to consider if you're coming down this route. Get the book written first. There's loads of craft resources out there. There's loads of courses. There's mentoring. There's loads of things to help you actually get the book written. But we're not going to cover that in any depth in this podcast. The next stage is editing your book. So again, this can take anything from a couple of months up to 6 months, depending on how many stages you go through, how many people are involved, how thorough you are with it, how able you are to just let your manuscript go, even if you don't think it's 100% perfect. These are all factors that will play into that. But again, I think you should be leaving yourself several months for the editing process. I personally am going to what's it going to be from the start to the finish? It's going to be about 6 months. It'll be for me for all the various stages that I've put the manuscript through, and the different people that have looked at it and so on. So yes, we'll talk more about the specifics of that another time. But that's editing your book, making sort of big what we call foundation decisions. So those are ones which are: who am I going to get to do my cover? Who am I going to get to do the editing that we've just discussed? Who am I going to get to do my marketing and publicity? Who am I going to get to format the book, which is obviously a big thing? Am I going to get someone to help me upload it, for example, or am I going to do that myself, and so on? So all of these kind of foundational decisions need to take place around about now, and ideally earlier, to be honest, because it's good to have a think about who your editor's going to be and book them in well in advance, because many of the better ones are quite busy. And so if you only give yourself 3 months for editing, it might be that the editor just simply can't get to your manuscript in those 3 months. And so you're then compromising on what you want, in terms of the editor that you choose, and that's not an ideal position to be in right at the start. So thinking about those foundation decisions on who you're going to work with and what jobs they're going to do and so on are a big part of that. And I would set aside a good bit of time to sit down and think about that and approach people and just check that everyone can do things within the timeline that you're hoping before you set anything in stone. I talked also there about building the book, so things like cover design or cover formatting, if you're not doing an illustrated one maybe, or the formatting of the interior of the book, uploading the actual manuscript, where to do it, how to do it, marketing your book as well, both pre and post publication. So there's a number of different things to consider at that foundation stage, and you should give yourself plenty of time to consider it, as well as to obviously book all the people in. So yeah, we get to building your book, and you want to make sure and I've said this before, I think, on the podcast, but I'll say it again, and I'll probably keep saying it. The exterior of your book, so that's whether you have an illustrated cover or a designed cover or however you go about it. I don't think you should do that yourself. I think you should hire a professional. So many people think, oh, that's an easy way to save money. I could just, go into Canva or any of these other softwares and just produce a book cover that's good. And sometimes, there are rare people that can do that, and they have the skills and the experience to produce a good book cover. But there are so many people who produce something that just doesn't look good. And I see them sometimes on Amazon, or when people post their covers online and so on. And I'm being honest here, I think that looks really amateurish. It doesn't look like a professional has done it, and it's probably because the person doing it is maybe the author or the author's niece or their wee pal from down the road or the girl who lives next door who is good at GCSE art or something like that. And it is much, I'm sure all these people are talented in their own way, but they're not professional book illustrators or cover designers. So therefore, they are just probably not going to get it right. And I think I know as a reader, and maybe I'm different from most people, but I suspect I'm the same. When I look at a cover, I do make a judgment, and I think everyone does that as much as the saying says to the contrary. And I think that it's the first, and in fact maybe even the most important impact you're going to make with someone in terms of getting them to be interested in your book and want to potentially read it. I know that the words count, and the actual story is well, it does trump the cover in terms of, I guess, having an audience that are going to finish the book and want to buy more of your books, etc., etc. But for that initial point of getting people interested in the book, that you need a great cover, and I do suggest you invest in this. Just to give you a sort of idea, sorry, of prices, because I know we're going to talk about it in the budget section, but you're talking at least a few £100s for a book cover, and obviously if you're choosing people who are freelance professionals and maybe work with big publishers and so on, they are going to charge a higher fee, understandably, because they have more experience and they are more likely to produce you something in line with what has been produced traditionally. And I guess for a self-published author, that is part of the goal. You want to do things your own way because you've gone down this path, but you also want to make sure that the reader basically won't know if you're self-published or traditionally published. That is the goal. You want them just to not think about who is publishing the book, and just simply that, oh, that looks like the kind of book I want to read, and then they pick it up and they read it, and they tell other people about it and so on. That is the ultimate goal. And so having a great cover really does help with that. We'll come, as I say, to more precise pricing in a few moments. Who do you choose? I think again it's hard because there's so many people out there that will. So if you put a post on social media, you'll get 50 people saying DM me, hit me up, blah blah blah. I'll do this for you. I'll do that for you. And they'll sometimes show you samples. They sometimes won't. Please, if you do go down that route and you advertise for an illustrator or cover designer online in public social media, beware that you will probably get spammed by people, and not all legitimate people either, and not all good people. And so you've got to be able to filter through that when you get those replies. It was something that I did, and I was lucky that I actually had quite a lot of like reputable, pre already published cover people that who work in the industry who were quite happy to have a look at the proposal for my project. But there was also a lot of people there that I think would have did some clip art and tried to tried to sell me a few £100 cover with two or three overlays of clip art and really bad graphics, or really poorly designed covers as well if it was in the upper end, the YA end. So yeah, there are people out there who will just who will take your money and not leave you with a good product. So just beware of that when you're choosing on that front. The next bit to talk about in terms of the timeline is to start thinking, okay, I've written my book, it's now edited, hopefully, And actually, you should be thinking about this during the editing stage as well, not just after the edits are done. You've made all your big foundation decisions. You've got your book design, your cover done, your illustrated cover, whatever you've decided to go for, and now you're thinking about formatting your book. Now, there's a few ways to go about this. Formatting is very tricky for books. It's something that you could learn yourself, but it would take you a while and a lot of trial and error and probably a lot of anguish. And it would take your mind and your focus off the other things. And I just think you, as a person, you always have to play to your strengths. You can certainly develop your weaknesses, but play to your strengths. Your strength, I think, if you're going down this route, is that you're a good writer and you've got a story to tell. I don't necessarily know that there's many people who have strengths in every facet that is required to self-publish a book well. I doubt there's many people out there that can do that, can do every single thing as well as a professional would. And so, therefore, sometimes you just got to say, well, actually, am I better just taking this out of my hands? And yes, it's extra cost, but this is something that's going to be worth it because I don't have the this distraction on my plate when I'm actually trying to produce the product, the story that is so important. And so, yeah, I think when it comes to formatting, my advice is just hire someone. You can do that, and just whenever I say just hire someone, you can just do a shout out in social media, but there's also uh, sites like Fiverr and Readsy and so on. Again, hard to tell how good people are going to be on those sites, except from obviously previous reviews and ratings and so on. But that is a place that you can start if you're not sure where to start. If you know people in publishing, or you know a friend who's published, or you know an illustrator, or you whatever, you can ask them who formatted their book. It might be someone within the publisher. So freelance formatters are a way to go. The way that I've decided to go, and I know a number of self-publishers also do this, is to use a software called Vellum. The Vellum is Mac only, I believe, at the moment. And although there's been rumors of it maybe becoming a PC thing at some point, but it's Mac only. And what it essentially does is you import your Word document, and it essentially you do have to make tweaks, but it essentially formats your entire book for you, and it gives you a range of styles, both in terms of the text and the font, and in terms of the headers, chapter headers, and so on. It allows you to insert, acknowledgement pages, epilogues, prologues, anything that you need to add to it, like social media tags at the end, links to other books, dedications, all the things that you'd see in a traditionally published book. It allows you to do all that without you having to worry about the formatting so much. And the good thing is as well, it gives you a on-screen visualization of what the book would look like at the time, even as you're making in program changes to the book, and it's really quite intuitive and fairly straightforward to work. I would say it's £200, I think, was what I paid for it. But what I would say is you have to view that as an investment. You might pay £200 for a format, or you might pay a little bit less, depending on who you get. But that would be for one book. Whereas when purchasing Vellum and learning the skills and the little um, nuances of how to format your book within that software, I think if you have a long term ambition to self publish, is definitely a way to go. I might do a wee episode where I talk about formatting in Vellum as well at some point, and because like people want to know how it works, and I know that certainly a few of my friends use it as well. So it's something that has a thumbs up and seal of approval from a few parties. But if you go and check it out, go and look at Vellum if you have a Mac and see what it's all about. If you don't have a Mac, then you might just have to go down the old hiring a formatter route as well. Okay, so that's formatting. I've talked probably too much about formatting in the timeline, but you're wanting to be doing that in a good enough time before your publication date. You don't want to leave it to the last couple of weeks and be in a rush and not being able to properly check over things, and to have a few trial runs and a few trial copies printed and sent out to you and so on. You want all that done in good time in advance of your publication date. Okay, and I think if you give yourself maybe 6 weeks, 2 months, then that's a reasonable amount of time in advance of publication date to have the formatting finished for. I think that would be what my advice would be. So we talked next a little bit about preparing for publication. Now, as you all know, publication is a scary thought for so many of us, but it's also a time of joy, and you should be thinking about the positives of that little period as well. It should be fun and enjoyable, and bring you happiness to talk about your book and to tell people about it and to start promoting it, and maybe to do a book launch and have the excitement of publication day coming upon you. However, what I would say is if you've left a lot of the other things and you're still scrabbling to do those in the few weeks before publication, then you're maybe less likely to enjoy that. And that's why I would say that maybe a 12-month, anything from 6 to 12 months, depending on which stage you're at, as a run-in period towards publication is probably a sensible thing to do. It's gonna be better for you at the end. So be your future friend and make sure that you leave yourself time to enjoy all the little bits in preparation for publication. But yeah, in terms of prepping, what are the kind of things we're talking about? We're talking about actually uploading your book and getting it onto the various platforms, whether that's KDP or Ingram Spark or wherever else you are publishing. There's other options as well. And we'll probably have an episode talking about all that. But draft to digital, for example, is another option as well. And obviously just manually printing as well. Maybe at your local print place wherever you live is a possibility too. I think I can't remember if that's what Maz did with hers back in 2014. If she just got a big print run done by a printing press, I think that's what she did, and then just went and physically sold all of her books at that point. And so that's obviously a possibility too. And what she talked about was when you do that big print run, it obviously brings down costs because you're doing it in bulk, and it means you can get the copies for cheaper, and then you're making a bigger margin on it when you do sell them. But anyway, that's for another episode. I think the actual printing and so on of the book. So you've got it uploaded. It's all ready to go. You are good to go. Everything from the writing and editing and formatting and uploading side of things is all done. Okay. You've got a few weeks now to publication, and you start putting on your marketing hat, and you start thinking, in fact, you should really have your marketing hat on from day one. If I'm being honest, you have to be thinking, okay, who's going to buy this book? Why are they going to buy it? What am I going to do to make sure that they know that this is the kind of book that they want to buy? It's in their taste. What are the various strategies and things that you're going to put in place, not just round publication, but all the time, to ensure that people are going to be seeing your book, see it's relevant, and want to buy it and to read the story within. Last time out, we talked to Maz about this, and she was talking about how she made sure that her book was linked to the Key Stage 2 curriculum. And that's a very sensible approach, just making sure that schools will have a reason to want to buy your book. Children will have a reason to want to buy it. Greek gods, everyone loves those tales, and kids are very much included in that. And so from a marketing point of view, she made her job easier by ensuring that the contents and theme and so on of her book were going to be relevant to the children that she was selling to, and also to the educators and librarians and so on, the people that are involved in education who are going to choose which books to have in schools. So you've got to be thinking about that all the way throughout. But I think that the most intense period is, I would imagine, is in the weeks, or certainly for me, it's going to be in the weeks leading up to and just after publication, and just making sure that, because if people don't know about your book, people can't buy your book. So you've got to make sure that people are aware of the fact that you've published it. And the key thing as well is, when you're thinking about marketing, don't think, okay, I need to get a big following on Twitter, or if you're in the YA sphere, thinking, oh, I need to go on to. Honestly, some of the terminology I hear people saying things like joining book talk or whatever, or get onto book talk. It's not really, it's not a thing you join or you get onto. You just go onto. You just go onto the app, and you take part and you talk about books and so on. It's not something you join in order to market your book. And I think if the only purpose for you going onto something like TikTok is to market your book, or going onto Twitter, or which is not the best place to market your kids' book, or to Instagram. Like that's not going to bring you the yields that you potentially think it will. The place that you need to be is you need to be where the kids are. So whether that's at book festivals or in schools doing events or wherever it might be, you need to get your book in front of them rather than. And I know that the parents are the guardians; they're the gatekeepers to the purse strings that are going to purchase the books, and so you do need to convince them as well, of course. And let's not discount adult sales. You know, a lot of adults read kids books, and I do it, for example, all the time. And so you are sort of catering to them, I guess, but they're not going to bring you the bigger numbers that you probably are wanting to see if you started out on this journey. And I should probably just point out at this point, like a lot of people just self-publish their book, I guess, just to hold it, just to say they've published a book, sell 20 copies, and they're very happy, and that's fine. And if that's the case, then probably none of this is relevant for you. You're just thinking about uploading a document to Amazon and maybe getting a few print copies and giving them to family and stuff, and that's totally legitimate. I can see the appeal in that as well. But if you're looking at this as something that's um, a career for you potentially, then you've got to look at it like a business and make all of these kind of business strategy decisions. Which brings us sort of to the end of the timeline, i.e., publication day. At this point, you'll have done all of your marketing. Everyone will know about your book. Lots of people have pre-ordered. We'll talk about pre-order campaigns at some point as well, because I've found that part of it quite tricky. Learning how, for example, self-publishing and traditional publishing differ in that way. But again, we'll talk about this in a separate episode. But you're thinking about maybe like a book launch, and I think a book launch is an incredible idea. I think people should do it. You should celebrate that you have achieved this thing where you've written a book, you've edited a book, or you've edited it with the help of a professional. You've got a great cover. You've prepared yourself in terms of your marketing and getting your book out there and so on. And you've spent a lot of time and effort, energy, and money on this thing, and that should be celebrated. So I would encourage anyone, even if you're self-publishing, go do a book launch. Get people around. You know, even if it's just your close friends and family. And the other thing about it as well is you can get some pictures of that, and it gives you stuff to share. And again, just to sort of raise awareness of your book and all that. It's well worth doing though. I mean, I can't wait to do my launch party. I'm going to do one online and one in person, and I can't wait to share that with people and to yeah, take joy in the accomplishment of publishing the book, because and this is key, especially if you're listening to this, you'll probably agree with this. There is it is there is not lesser to self-publish than it is to get traditionally published, and I don't see self-published authors maybe celebrating in the same way that traditional published authors do, and I think that's a shame that they don't, because think about all the things we've just discussed that you have had to do. You've had to project manage all of those aspects of the publication of your book. You've done way more than a traditionally published author does to get their book published. And I know that from very good sources, that the traditional route is not easy, of course, but you just don't have to project manage in the scale that you do for self publishing. So please make sure that you have some sort of celebration lined up for around about publication day. Not only the fact it signifies that moment, it also takes your mind away from the actual book being published and the thought of people reading it and all those other things that can be a bit scary and anxiety inducing at that point in time. So make sure you prepare yourself a book launch and have one around about the publication date. So does marketing finish when you published your book? Well, of course not, silly. That's in some ways that's only the beginning, isn't it? You've got a lot to do beyond that as well, and so that's obviously something that, in terms of your timeline, you would add as a post-publication activity. And again, I think when I get to that stage, we'll definitely do a wee episode about it, and we'll discuss the positives, the pitfalls, the things that I've done right and wrong, as I'm sure there'll be many, and we'll go into that in more depth then. So in terms of timelines, yeah, I'm thinking it's 12 months. If you certainly if you're still working in the book, maybe if you have the book done, then you're still looking at 3-4 months, especially if you require edits and so on. and you still need someone to do your cover, and they might be booked up and not have time to do it for quite a while. I I always just think that time is good for you when you're doing this kind of endeavor. It brings a peace of mind saying, okay, well, that editor said they can't get it back to me until 2 weeks later after they promised. No problem. I've built in that buffer. That is a good mental state to be in, because I know that a lot of people can get fixated with dates and timelines and so on, or they can just not leave themselves enough time to get the various things done. And if there's delays, that can cause a real amount of anxiety that you just don't need, with on top of everything else that you're trying to stay on top of with publishing your book. So yeah, give yourself plenty of time, and things will always take longer than you think they will, and they will always cost more than you think they will. Which leads us nicely and segs us nicely into part two of this episode, where we talk about budgets. So I'm just going to get my budget on screen here so that I've got it while we chat about this and so on. So I'll talk about general numbers. I'll give you a couple of my specifics as well. But as I have not finished all of the stages yet, I can't be completely definitive about how much this book is going to cost. But I've got, as you'd imagine, knowing me, I've got a spreadsheet that's got various formula in it and lots of projected numbers and so on. So I can sort of talk through that, and talk as well about how to set up a business for your writing, and where to go from there. So I think the first thing that you should do if you decide to go down this route is to think about money, because ultimately not everyone has the same amount of disposable cash to spend on publishing their book. Maz was interesting in the last episode with her take on this, because she talked, I think she said she spent about £2,000 in the production of her self-published book, and that was obviously, I guess, without marketing and all that other stuff, because she was just getting her product in school, so therefore maybe didn't need as much of a push on that front. But £2,000 is a lot of money for a lot of people, and certainly if you're making a choice between £2,000, it can go towards your heating costs, your mortgage, your kids, towards your kids' first car, or to them going to uni, or I don't know, a family holiday, or whatever you would spend that money on. It's a tough call to decide to spend that on publishing a book instead of all those things, and it's something I talked about in a previous episode. I have battled really really hard with over the months in advance of deciding to do this, and it was only in discussion with my family and getting the go ahead from them, and them saying that they were happy for me to do that, that I decided to actually go ahead with it. And that's something you all need to do, unless you're a single person with no dependents, and your money's yours and you can spend it how you like. You probably need to come and an agreement, and have a discussion about this with the people around you who are going to be affected by financial decisions you make. The other thing as well is that with budgets, they are always more than what you plan them to be. So I would just account for that right from the start. Add a buffer. Make sure that you've got not just what you're budgeting, but a little bit more available to you, because you don't want to be starting it and then realizing, oh, I need to cut corners later and so on. And it reminds me, actually, what popped into my head there is Grand Designs. I don't know if any of you watch it, but they basically build a house and they have a budget at the start and below. And every single time someone goes on that, they go way over budget, and they end up having to do a crazy number of things to try and somehow get the money together, because basically once they start, they can't stop. And so if it costs extra money, they just have to find the money. And I'm not saying that you can't stop with self publishing, but once you've started to spend money on it, it is hard for you to then say, oh, actually, I don't know, I'm now going to cut corners and not spend money on the other things, and not produce the high quality product that you want to produce. Yeah, I mean, and this is where it becomes very individual, I think, when we start setting budgets. So yeah, as I say, Maz was quite honest and open enough to share hers in the last episode, and she said about £2,000. Now, that was in 2014, and as I say, she didn't really have to do too much marketing or publicity, because she had her audience right in front of her. I don't necessarily have that, so I'll have to spend a bit more money on marketing and publicity. Um, Costs of things are just more expensive now than they were in 2014, clearly. that's what happens. And so my budget at the moment is coming in at a bit of an eye-watering £4,300 for the publication of this book. Now, that might you might be listening to this and going, "What? Why is a person spending that amount of money on self-publishing a book?" And what how are they possibly ever going to get that money back? Now, I've done the maths on it, and it's a huge ask. You're right. I might not see the money back. And what I've done, and it's something that Matt says in the last episode, but it's also something that I've done as well. Is I've just said in my mind, okay, the money is spent, and whatever comes in now is good. But I'm not doing this in order to make the money back and to make money necessarily. That's not the primary purpose of the project, although that will be the obviously. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't make that your primary purpose. I think we should get paid for writing our books. That's, as if you listen to the last episode, you'll have heard Maz talking about that in quite some depth about how artists don't necessarily get the reward that they deserve for all the time and effort and hours they put in, and also all the joy and reward that they give to young readers as well. It doesn't seem like a fair system. But if we're just sticking to the numbers here rather than systemic things which we don't really have any control over, I'm going to spend just over £4,300 projected. Some of this might change. I might spend a little bit less on some things or a little bit more on other things. So we'll see what happens. The numbers to make that money back, if I wanted to break even, I'm going to have to sell around about 2,200 paperbacks, and I've only put in a couple hundred ebooks. Now, the reason I've done that is because you might think, oh, you maybe sell more ebooks than you think, but in the middle grade purchasing market, it's 96% paperback and only about 4% ebook at that stage, or similar figures to that. That might have changed since I read that, but it's certainly a much higher percentage of paperback. So that's why I've very much leaned towards that in terms of my projections. And again, you might be thinking 2,500. That's a crazy number of books to sell, and you're right. It is a lot to sell if I want to break even. But it's I'm looking at it as a long term thing. I'm not expecting that I would sell all of those in the first year. As you know, the target is 1,000, and if I can do that, I'll be very happy. But then 2,500 then obviously then becomes a good target to chase after that, doesn't it? Or 2,000 first of all, and then 2,500. And when you start getting to that stage, you start thinking, okay, well, I'm starting to recoup the majority of the investment in this book now, and you'll feel better about things. But as I say, I've just in my mind, I've just mentally prepped myself for if I sell 0 copies, which I hope isn't going to be the case, then I would be disappointed. I would definitely be disappointed. I'd be a bit gutted as well about spending that amount of money and not seeing any sort of return back on it as well. But I am not going to spend the rest of my life sort of regretting that decision, because amidst we talk about money a lot, don't we? And it's obviously a driving factor in our lives and our happiness and so on. But I just think if I am lying on my deathbed, hopefully in many years' time, and I might have a big grey beard then, or no hair, or my currently very bushy eyebrows will become even more bushy as I become an older man, and maybe some flecks of salt and pepper in there. Who knows? Anyway, when I'm lying on my deathbed, I hope that I will look back and say, well, I gave it a go. I published my book. It will still be out. Well, hopefully still be out there and available for sale on my deathbed. But hopefully by that point I'll have said, yeah, the money, okay, it would have been good, and it's a financially difficult time as we are at the moment, and obviously I made this decision before the gas bill started going up and before everything went a bit crazy financially. But I won't don't think I'll regret spending the money. I might regret it in the short term, but not in the long term. And I suppose you have to make decisions based on your long term happiness as well as your short term. So anyway, that's a little bit of a breakdown of my numbers. I'll go down the list actually and tell you what roughly all that's been spent on. So edits in total is about it's just over £2,000 projected at the moment, because I haven't had the last couple of bits in and had the invoices and so on. But that's roughly what has been spent, and that's because I've had a developmental edit, I've had a line edit, a copy edit, and a proof edit, or I will have had all of those by the end of the process. And that's the stages that you would go through if you were traditionally published. And so I've been determined to make sure that I get all of those in with my manuscript, because although you can the costs are pretty big, as you've heard, it's important to me that the book and the product that goes out there will feel on par with other books in terms of the editing. You can't control how much people will enjoy the story, but in terms of the editing, it'll be on par with anything else that's out there from a traditional publisher. Cover. Now the cover cost, literally the cover on its own cost £350 plus VAT, so about 420, sorry, for the cover, the illustrated cover. And actually, if you've seen my cover, you probably would agree that's a complete steal to get a cover of that quality for that price. I had budgeted around about that, to be honest, when it had started out. But and if it'd gone more, I might have started to struggle and think, okay, I need to, I maybe need to look around. But I was lucky that I got the talented artist that I did for that particular price. And actually, I know Jen's going to come on and speak to me on the podcast at some point to talk about authors working with cover illustrators and the process and what to expect and so on at some point as well. So that'll be a good episode to look forward to. I also got her to do some character art for me because I was building a website and I'll do bookmarks and so on, and it's good to have that character art to put on them rather than the cover's fine, but just to have something for a bit of variance, I think is good. So I spent a little bit of additional on that, not an obscene amount, but a little bit more. The formatting is £200 because I bought vellum, and the good thing is, if I continue to self-publish books, vellum is now purchased, which means that the formatting costs will just be my time going forward, and that's a good thing. And with this iteration of producing a book, I decided that there was going to be one thing that I would try and do mostly myself, and I would try and learn, and that's what the vellum part has been. So I'll focus on trying to get as good with that as I can on this particular production of a book, and then maybe the next time I produce a book, because I'll hopefully have the skills to format it in vellum, I'll look at another area that maybe I could do more in. And then over time, you can maybe start building up skills that will mean you have to expend less on the production of your book. So that's obviously a bit of a tip for you if you're thinking of doing it. However, if you just don't have the cash, then you just have to put in the time and effort yourself to learn all these things. We go on then to things associated with publicity and marketing and getting your book out there. I have budgeted for just under £1,000 at the moment on publicity and marketing. That includes I'm hoping to get a wee trailer done as well for the book. Do a couple of wee giveaways and such things. So again, that probably seems like quite a lot, and from speaking to a few of my traditionally published friends, that's probably several times larger than the marketing budget that their publisher has given them. And I don't think I'm exaggerating too much by that. So I'm hoping that'll help as well, because as I said earlier on, if people don't know about your book, they're not going to be able to buy your book, and so that's what I've set aside for that particular phase of it. And I've got someone who has a lot of experience in that area to help me out with those particular things. So that's the budget. As I say, it comes in just over 4,300, and that's obviously a projection and not a fixed figure. At some point on the podcast, what I'll actually do is I'll come back and I'll tell you the exact final figure, just so that you know what that is, and then I'll tell you how many books require to be sold in order to match that, because I think that's quite interesting for an audience. I know it's something that when I listen to other self-published authors and so on speaking or doing blog posts or whatever they do, I'm always interested in those figures. So there you go. That's a little bit of insight in terms of that. So that's the budget. Okay, now you obviously can change your budget. If you have £500 to spend on your book, you have to spend that on the thing that you think is most important. Okay, and that might, I mean, let's be honest, it probably has to be on either the cover artist or the editing, depending on how good a self editor you are. As I sort of alluded to earlier on, my priority, I think, would probably be the cover. I know it sounds really shallow, because the content surely matters more, and you'd be better spending that on an editor. But I don't know. Like I do make a lot of my decisions on the cover and the first few pages of a book when I look at the preview, and you can edit the first few pages, or get good, editorial critique partners or whatever to help you get those first few pages in really good shape. And so therefore, maybe if if you're just looking at sales and so on, that's maybe the thing to focus on. I don't know. It depends what's most important to you. If you'd rather the text shone and you had a bit of a rubbish cover, then you maybe go the other way. But you have to decide obviously where you're going to put your money when you're budgeting. And yeah, that's a little rundown from my point of view. I wouldn't expect anyone would be spending as much of as money as I have on their book, and I'm sure that's probably not typical. I'm sure that's probably more than typical. But what the other thing as well that I should say at this point as well, it also gives you an insight into how much traditional publishers are paying, and they're probably paying way more than what I've put in my budget there per book. And sometimes people say, oh, what is the publisher actually doing? Well, they are spending a bit of money. They might not be doing as much as you'd like them to do, but they are definitely spending money in all these areas. And I know that traditionally published authors get those 4 rounds of edits. I know that they hire either in-house or freelance people to do covers or illustrated covers. I know that they've got formatters and so on, marketers and publicists and stuff, and that are in-house and also freelance. So they are spending the money on these things too. And I would imagine they're maybe spending a bit more than I have as well. So you've got to think about all these facts. Ultimately, though, you can upload a manuscript to KDP, for example, if you're wanting to sell it via them or to Ingram Spark, and not actually pay very much money at all. There are small things like you probably want to get yourself some ISBNs, which is actually a cost that I've not put in that budget there, which I'd need to add. So ISBNs, I think it's about 150 for a pack of 10. Again, that's a spread cost, so I'm not going to use all of them on this book, and I'd maybe use it across several books. So by spending now, I save later, sort of thing. So that again makes this a slightly atypical budget. The other things as well that you need to pay for are there's a fee with Ingram Spark for using them as your print provider as well, and there's a whole range of other small expenses as well. For example, if you're setting up your company, which is something I'm going to talk about in a minute, there's a small cost associated with that too. So the entirety of your budget is often going to escalate beyond even what you thought initially, because there's all these little things that maybe you haven't considered or thought about. Karen Ingles' book is really good for this. She talks you through a lot of these things that I've mentioned here. She gives you advice on places to go to find them as well, and that's something I'm trying to compile too for future episodes. But yeah, like have a look at her book if you're interested in finding out more and sort of pursuing any of those avenues and those parts of your budget. So hopefully that's been useful, that I've shared that little insight with you. Going to talk a little bit about setting up a business and why you should do that and why I think that's a sensible move to start with. The first thing is setting up a business. You can do that quite easily. You can do it in a very short space of time over on Company's House. You just go in there and you can start a new company. I think, I can't remember how much I paid. Is it £10 or £15, £20? I can't remember. It's a low bar to actually start a company. It's a responsible thing to do though, and it shouldn't be taken lightly. Obviously, as anything with self-publishing shouldn't. But setting up a company is definitely a good and wise start, because you are going to be spending money before you make money, which means you're going to make a loss probably in your first year at the very least, if not for several years. And if you set up as a company, what you can do is you can save yourself money in the long term by having your losses early doors and recording those losses with HMRC at the end of the tax year. So that's a good bit of advice if you're starting this. If you just do it where you spend your own cash, and then when money's coming in, you then have to declare that money, and then you're paying tax on that money if you're lucky enough to be earning that sort of quantity. But you still have to declare it even if it's not at the tax level. You immediately fall into that category of not being able to claim back on future tax and such things, because you haven't declared all your losses necessarily either. And if you do it through a company, it's very easy to record these things and to keep them separate from your own personal finances. Because some, say you pay £200 in vellum, and you then are looking back through your receipts, you might find other things £200. You get confused, and you maybe went on a wee weekend break and spent 200 quid, and which one is it? Is it that one or is it that one? And it can be quite confusing. So to keep your finances separate, and actually this was something Maz said actually in the last episode, didn't she, about keeping your sort of personal finances and your business finances separate. And what then that allows you to do is to say, well, all of this money that is built up here as a result of my writing, all this money here is the money that's for me and my family, and to pay our mortgage and our bills, and do all the things that you do in a day-to-day bit of life. And this other thing is just my business thing. And if a business makes a loss, then obviously that's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world either. But if you are losing and hemorrhaging money from your family account or your own account, that's not ideal. So that's the first thing that I would suggest you do. You set up that business account, and uh, yeah, you set up the company, and you also set up a business account with the bank, because you want to keep those finances separate, as I say, and it's easier to link your company to a singular bank account. So you might do your taxes yourself, or you might get someone to do them for you. And if you're employing someone, then if they can just quickly look into your bank account, they can see all the incoming and the outgoings, and they can quickly then calculate your tax for you. And that also saves you money, doesn't it, in terms of what you're paying that accountant. So there's a couple of other tips as well that I would suggest you do when you start out in this journey. My company name is Penobi Press. It's just a daft and joke. Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I'm a writer, so Pen Obi. So I went with that as my company name. But you can make up anything, and that's the thing. When you upload to KDP or Ingham Spark, you put in your company name, and it can be whatever you want. It can be just whatever you fancy. I think Maz last week said that she used her Story Stew, which was a company that she had already set up before she self-published, but she just continued it through there, and then that way was able to keep her personal and her business finances separate. Okay, so I hope this whole episode has been useful to you and given you a bit more of an insight into the business side of things, the timeline that you should be giving yourself, what you should do in terms of budgeting at the start, and how you should separate your finances, one from the other, from your business to your personal, because that's an important thing to do. I think sometimes we can allow our mental health and mind state to depend upon the performance of things out with our control. And selling books is certainly something that's not going to be in your control, or not as much in your control as you would like. And so you can separate those two things. You can still live a happy life with your family, or whoever you're with, and have the writing thing as a separate business thing. And as I say, if it doesn't go well, then that sucks. And um, you're not going to be happy about that. But it's a business thing, rather than you sapping and leeching at your personal finances in order to afford to do it. So that's that's my best bit of advice on all things budgets, companies, and timelines. So I will see you guys next time, hopefully on the next episode of the 1100 project.